Let's go to London and speak to Tahani Mustafa, Senior Palestine Analyst at the International Crisis Group. Welcome to the programme, Tahani. I'm not sure if you've heard what our correspondents have been saying, but it appears as if Arab nations may need to step up a little bit more quickly here because of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's ideas about the future of Gaza. The Arab nations have a plan, but we don't know exactly what the details are. But surely for the Palestinian people of Gaza, any Arab plan would be preferable to an American-Israeli plan the way it's being presented right now. But the Arabs are not coming out in public and saying what they can do for Gaza.
Well, that's right. The Palestinians would rather some sort of regional brokered plan rather than something imposed on them by Israel and its U.S. ally. However, unfortunately, we have seen a significant reluctance from Arab states to really take the initiative here. Obviously, they're very much bound by agreements that they have made, their respective normalization deals with Israel. The fact that many of them are so dependent on U.S. aid, countries like Jordan, for instance, are dependent not just on the U.S. financially, but also for the regime's survival, right? There's a significant amount of security goes in, as well as obviously in the context of Egypt, its significant dependence on U.S. funding for its entire military complex. So, there is a significant level of dependence here. So it's very unlikely that they're going to be taking the initiative here to try and put forward something that really doesn't necessarily benefit their own national interests. The issue of Palestine is something that isn't really of national interest for these regimes. There is a lot of sort of complacency even amongst their populations. There's been significant reduction in terms of the level of activism we've seen over the decades around the issue of Palestine at a grassroots level in Arab states for various reasons. So there's really no pressure on them, either internationally or domestically, to really try and broker something reasonable for the Palestinians. But ultimately, Hamas and other Palestinian factions have come out and said that they would much rather an Arab brokered initiative here, but it has to be one that is done in cooperation with the Palestinians. Again, it's not just any brokered Arab deal here. They're asking for the Arab states to treat them as equal partners in any sort of future for Gaza, rather than, again, trying to impose some kind of reality that really doesn't serve Palestinians in the slightest.
What do you make of the prospects for peace while Israel continues to attack the occupied West Bank? I think it was probably about 9 months ago or so, the UN's Human Rights Commissioner, Volker Turk, said those attacks by the Israeli military and illegal Israeli settlers are putting the entire future of a Palestinian state at risk. How can there be peace in Gaza while the Israelis are attacking every day the occupied West Bank?
Well, that was precisely the rationale that Hamas put forward in their own words, right? They had released that entire manifesto detailing the reasons for the 7th of October. And a significant part of that was precisely because of the kind of land grabs we've seen over the last 15 months in the West Bank, the kind of settler violence that we have seen in the West Bank over the last 15 months, and especially since the announcement of the ceasefire, the kind of search and arrest operations that are being conducted that are so destructive to Palestinian localities, that always bring with them Palestinian fatalities. That was exactly what spurred on the rationale for doing what they did on the 7th of October. And now something like this, I think many had anticipated, especially regional mediators. Hamas themselves had already warned back in November that if we were to see any attempted ceasefire in Gaza, they knew it would come at a cost, and that cost would be paid in the West Bank. So it's no surprise as to what we're seeing in terms of the ramping up of Israeli state violence, but this certainly does nothing to cool temperatures on the ground, especially amongst Palestinians. If the goal here is to eliminate radicalism, whether it's in Gaza or in the West Bank, destroying whole Palestinian towns and localities, and quite literally endangering Palestinian life, is not a way to resolve conflict here. It's not going to be the way to cool temperatures and mitigate the radicalism that is driving a lot of younger Palestinians into armed resistance.
The two countries that Donald Trump is specifically mentioning when he talks about his idea of forcibly evicting 2 million residents of Gaza are Egypt and Jordan. Would there be a reluctance from both of those countries to take in more Palestinian refugees, especially Jordan, considering that if those 2 million people were permanently displaced and Palestinian resistance groups continued while living in Egypt and Jordan, that could destabilize those two countries?
Well, precisely. I think in the context of Egypt, the concern is that any sort of displacement of Gazans into Egypt will then lead to cross-border skirmishes from Egypt's own territory, from resistance elements. In the case of Jordan, I think the issue here is both not just the spillover of potential, conflict from Gaza into Jordanian territory and the cross-border skirmish there, but also the fact that this then could set precedents for what Israeli far-right ministers have been calling for the last 15 months, which is total annexation of the West Bank. We've already seen that very much. We've seen changing facts on the ground leading to that trajectory, where we've seen Israel conduct some of the largest land grabs since 1993, since the Oslo Accords. We've seen significant numbers of displacement of Palestinians across different localities in the West Bank. And that has been a real fear for Jordan, is that this will then set the precedents for Israel to go ahead with plans to create the kind of de facto state that they have been talking about since the inception of this conflict into Jordan. That's something that King Abdullah has reiterated just recently. The same thing with Ayman Safadi, the foreign minister. Obviously, this makes politically no sense for the regimes to take in displaced Gazans. But however, unfortunately, I think if the price is right, if the US is willing to offer the right kind of operational and financial support to do that, I really wouldn't rule it out, considering, some of the statements we saw coming out from King Abdullah after his meeting with Trump, which wasn't necessarily an outright condemnation. Yes, King Abdullah is under significant pressure, given Jordan's significant reliance on the US. However, they could have done something similar to Egypt, which was refuse to meet Trump as long as displacement is on the agenda. It's those sorts of rhetorical gestures that could have really meant something, offered some symbolic optimism, I think, for many, that Jordan wouldn't go along if it had to. And that's really not the kind of indications we're getting from these regimes.
Tahani Mustafa, thank you so much for spending time with us on TRT World. Really interesting to hear your thoughts.